Hello and welcome to this video on the cattle industry. This is part 2 of the series on the cattle industry. If you've not watched part 1, what are you doing? Go back and watch that one first. As you know, chronology matters in history. Sorry again for the quality of the video on this one. As you can see, I am moving in slow motion because of the borrowed laptop. Anyway, let's get cracking on. So, we're going to start with just thinking about life as a cowboy. So life as a cowboy can be quite difficult and dangerous. The journeys on the trails could take months. So the Goodnight Loving Trail takes about 6 months to travel along fully. Chisholm could take up to 3. Cows themselves can cause problems. There's stampeding. You can crush cowboys as flat as a pancake when you're overrun by a herd of cows. There's a lot of cattle rustling, stealing cows, a common problem. And the cowboys also come into conflict with the homesteaders too, particularly when crops are trampled or if water is in short supply. On the ranch, things for a cowboy may be slightly easier, but can still be challenging. Whilst the drives to market are generally shorter, winter on the plains is very harsh. It's very cold. Rustling is also still an issue, as was conflict with homesteaders. And as the West is settled further, the conflict only increases. Barbed wire was invented by Joseph Glidden in 1873, and its use soon spread. And barbed wire causes further conflict because the homesteaders, understandably, are trying to protect their crops. And the cowboys, in return, are just trying to access the trails, they're trying to water their cattle, and they're cutting barbed wire. And we even get barbed wire wars, fence-cutting wars going on. And ultimately, as well as our fence-cutting wars, we get a common conflict called a range war, specifically over the cattle industry and over these cowboys. And the Johnson County War of 1892 is the most famous and the one that you need to know for your exam. We'll talk about that later. So, the 1880s then is where things start to go wrong. In our previous video, we talked about the 1870s beef bonanza. Things had been going well, hence the smiley face. The cattle industry was somewhere you could make lots of money. It was a large employer. Things were going well. But throughout the 1870s, huge amounts of money have been invested into cattle ranching, and the open range becomes overstocked. There are, again, too many cattle. We talked about this as a problem way back in the 1860s, specifically in Texas. Now a similar challenge is happening here, overstocked. This leads to a number of quite important and serious consequences in the 1880s. We see the lowering of prices. Too many cattle are on the market. The refrigerated rail car had also been invented, which meant that it was easier to transport large amounts of meat right across America, and that contributes to these lower prices. By 1882, the profits from cattle ranching has really dropped significantly. We also see increasing damage to land. There's too many cattle on too small an area. The soil is becoming damaged. And in 1883, there's a particularly bad drought which worsens conditions and leads to a death of grass and ultimately not enough food for the cattle. So as we head through the 1880s, the cattle are getting weaker and weaker on the plains. This all comes to a head in 1886, 1887. The winter there is nicknamed the Great Die-Up. And as the name suggests, this is not a good time. And as my two sad face emojis suggest, this is not a good result for the cattle industry. The winter is extremely harsh. Temperatures drop to as low as sort of minus 50, I think minus 55 degrees centigrade. That is cold. This, unsurprisingly, kills huge amounts of cattle. Maybe up to 1 in 5 cattle die. And this impact means that the cattle industry is severely damaged. The surviving cattle are often in really bad condition. The ranchers are trying to sell these cows quickly, so the beef prices are falling even further. And this contributes to what we're going to talk about next, the end of the open range. So, after this winter of 1886 to 87, many ranchers go out of business. This then allows homesteaders to move in greater numbers, and so in many parts of the Great Plains, the open range closes and or is disappeared. So you do get some smaller ranches fenced off by barbed wire or ploughed up for farming, and ultimately the cattle industry is never the same again. It's never quite the money-making scheme as it was before, and many cowboys have to look for jobs elsewhere. The final significant moment of the cattle industry comes in 1892 with the Johnson County War. So buckle in, because I'm going to explain this to you over the next few minutes. Now, this is the most famous of the previously mentioned range wars. These are conflicts over land between the cowboys and the settlers, and in this particular case, we are looking at powerful cattle barons who own huge amounts of land versus smaller ranchers and homesteaders in the state of Wyoming. Tensions have been building for many years. In the 1870s, the huge cattle ranchers had taken over large amounts of land. But, as we've mentioned, the winter of 1886, the Great Die-Up changes things. Cattle are dying, and the smaller ranchers are struggling to recover. And actually, some of them start raising their own cattle. The larger ranchers become quite suspicious. They say, these smaller ranchers, these homesteaders are turning into ranchers. They're stealing cattle, even when there's little proof of that. And because the big ranchers have more power and more influence, they have a role in law and order, juries rarely found anyone guilty of rustling. This increases anger amongst the smaller ranchers. The situation worsens when larger ranchers ban the smaller ranchers from the spring roundup, which meant they could not collect and brown calves. This gives the big ranchers control over any unbranded cattle. They just claim any spares, which makes tensions worse. Violence breaks out with the murder of Jim and Ella, two homesteaders accused of stealing cattle, and they are hanged without proper trial on the orders of a powerful rancher. So, conflict breaks out. The big ranchers, the WGSA, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, plan a full-scale attack. They raise money, they hire armed gunmen, and they call themselves the Invaders, and they create a kill list of any suspected rustlers. They also, as you can see there, pose for a team photo before engaging in their crimes, which doesn't feel like the wisest of decisions, but hey. So the Invaders, under the orders of the big ranchers, the cattle barons, enter Johnson County and begin their attack. It does not go to plan. A large group of locals surround the Invaders at the KC Ranch and held them under siege. And eventually the US Army has to intervene to save the Invaders and end the fighting. Why is this important? Well, it shows that conflict over land, over the cattle industry, could lead to violence in the West. It also highlights the weaknesses in the legal system. This is useful for law and order as well, because the Invaders had support from powerful political figures, they had access to the best lawyers, and ultimately the trial fails. They're not properly punished. Many of the charges are dropped. And this really is a last hurrah for the cattle industry, because you don't need to know anything about it beyond this point. So, in summary, what have we talked about in this video? We've said that life of a cowboy is hard. That is something specifically you could have a question on. We've reminded you that the 1870s were good times for cowboys, see previous video, but by the 1880s, overstocking was leading to crisis. The winter of 1886 to 87, nicknamed the Great Die-Up, was arguably the nail in the coffin and led to the end of the open range. And finally, not the Johnson County War as it says there, the Johnson County War of 1890 shows the intersection between law and order and the cattle industry. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you for watching. Please do keep an eye on the channel for other videos which will be coming soon. Take care and keep revising.